Good afternoon. I'm Andy Bell and I'm a director at Ramboll, and I'm also on the ACE's Voice of Consultancy board, where I represent the Transport and Mobility Group. Welcome to this special seminar hosted for the inaugural Green Infrastructure Week. This webinar explores net zero roads. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to ACE members and of course, but also EIC members and others as we come together to discuss how roads can meet ambitions for net zero. To provide some additional content, ACE have been working with members to produce a guide on the role of roads in delivering net zero. We hope to publish this full document soon, but we'll share some of the findings in today's seminars. The national effort to make the UK economy fully net zero by 2050 affects every sector and every business and has huge implications for the built environment. Consultancies will need to collaborate with clients to decarbonise the design, construction and maintenance of roads. They will also need to support clients and others completely rethink how transport systems are planned and operated so that they can deliver the benefits of mobility and communications within increasingly tight emissions budgets. So, moving on to today's event, we have a great panel with us today and I will introduce them shortly. But before I do, let's run through some housekeeping. To ask questions, if you please would use the chat function. We'll try and answer as many questions as possible, but don't worry, we'll also answer any others we don't get round to and publish those later. Don't worry also if you miss anything or you want to share this seminar with a colleague. We will be uploading this to our sites and onto YouTube as well in the coming days. So the speakers we have today, I'm delighted to say we have joining us today Tim Chapman, who is a Director of Infrastructure at ARUP, Angela Halliwell, Head of Net Zero Carbon at National Highways, Andrew Weaver, a Director at Copper Consultancy, and Gitto Davies, Head of Policy at the ACE, who will be taking us through some of what is included in the ACE's Net Zero guide. Each speaker will have around 6 minutes to present their thoughts, and we'll then open up to a virtual floor for a discussion and Q&A session. Our first speaker is Tim Chapman of ARUP. Over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Andy, and hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Hope you're all settled carefully for a nice chat about the future of highways, future of roads, and everything else. So I'm going to set up my stall a little bit about the purpose of roads or highways. I'm actually really glad the event is called Roads because I think that's a much more generic term. And I think it's important to think about sort of the overall opportunity for mobility and what roads and highways do for society. I think you can have the concept of a good road and a bad road. I think most urban motorways would agree would be a bad road. I think we'd probably agree that, as an example, a road that takes people out of a town centre to an out-of-town shopping centre and thereby causes the town to suffer hugely would be a bad road. And we've also got lots of good roads. I mean, we actually need road system to make sure that we can move our freight and people around. Very often people think about mobility, think about people only. They forget about the fact that we get all of our goods, everything comes by road or by highway in various ways. But there's better ways we can do that. I think it's important to actually think very carefully about what roads do for society, therefore, as a result. And I think talking to Gitto and others in the guide is going to talk about, we were introducing the concepts of actually the fact that roads should all satisfy nowadays 5 key requirements. The first one that actually always existed, is value for money. Money is a scarce commodity, and therefore we need to make sure we actually spend our money carefully. But actually, equally importantly, is value for carbon. Carbon is also a scarce currency, equally scarce, so you could even argue more scarce than money. And therefore, we need to actually make sure every road scheme gives us value for whole life carbon. And therefore, we must make sure we don't build road schemes that we will regret in the future. I think an awful lot of road schemes that are proposed, I would support, some of which I think I would actually probably not support, and maybe in the question to come on to what some of those might be. But the other 3 criteria that we should actually check for is actually making sure that we achieve social value. And that's my point about urban highways. I think it's very seldom you get an urban highway that actually satisfies social value. I also have the biodiversity crisis equally pressing as the carbon crisis. There's lots of things that we're actually stuffing up on the planet. Especially sort of SDG 13 is the one I'm critically with. I know Angela will be as well, but actually 14 and 15 are equally in danger. We need to make sure that we solve those as well. But also resilience. An awful lot of road schemes nowadays actually are about resilience and can provide resilience in various ways. And resilience needs to be interpreted broadly. It's not just resilience against physical, it's also against all of them. I think the really fun thing about these criteria is that they're areas where we can do better and where we need to think more hardly, much more carefully about them, and actually manage to do a whole series of trade-offs. So I would like to see that the actual Green Book being rewritten to actually include these 5 criteria about which road schemes we choose to take forward. And I've looked at a lot of infrastructure schemes, and I find if you apply these 5 criteria intelligently, I think we can actually do an awful lot better. So I'm just going to terminate now, just remind you, I'm talking about value for money, value for carbon, social value, biodiversity, and resilience. And if we think about how we're going to actually achieve those 5 separate criteria on every infrastructure scheme, but actually every road, every highway scheme as well, I think we actually bring the world to a much better place.
Thank you, Tim. That's great. Now to our second panelist, Angela Halliwell, who is Head of Net Zero Carbon at National Highways.
Hi, thank you. Like they said, my name is Angela Halliwell. I am the head of the new Central Carbon team in National Highways. The Central Carbon team was created as part of a wider commitment by National Highway in putting net zero and environmental protection at the heart of everything we do. I joined the company in January this year. I work for Steve Elderkin. He's the new Director of Environment and Sustainability. And the key focus areas for myself are the organisational change required to deliver net zero, and then implement and deliver our very ambitious net zero plan. I want to start though just in something of support of what Tim said. So National Highways strongly support the case for roads. They're an integral part of our transport system. 80% of families own a car, 9 out of 10 passenger miles are travelled by road, and over 70% of the freight goods are moved by road. Roads provide a convenient, low cost and practical way to see family, travel, work, and deliver goods. The strategic road network dependent sectors employs 7.4 million and contributes about 314 billion to the economy. Notwithstanding, road travel currently presents a high carbon way of travel, but this is fast changing with the phase out of petrol and diesel from cars, but also then with heavy good vehicles from 2040. The future of road travel is a net zero one. So National Highways recognise the importance of change, and as such we launched our very ambitious net zero plan last July. We've got 3 key focus areas: net zero from our corporate emissions by 2030, net zero from our maintenance construction by 2040, and road user by 2050. And each of those present challenges within themselves. So our first ambition is to look at our own operations. In 2020, we actually achieved our commitment and bought 100% certified renewable electricity. Our focus now is more on how do we generate more energy from our own sites, and how do we decarbonise our own travel, and switching over our lights to LED lighting on the network. Our second one around construction and maintenance, though, it has significantly challenges, some of which lie outside of our control, particularly within the supply chain. Some of the areas we will be focusing on is a roadmap for zero carbon, asphalt, cement and the steel sectors. Our third one with regards to road users equally is outside of our direct control, but that doesn't mean that we can't play our part. Our priorities are to help roll out solutions to decarbonise HGVs, support the uptake of electric vehicles and cars, and really critically modal shift. So within the National Highways Net Zero plan, we have a number of commitments. So particularly around planting 3 million trees, our EV traffic officer vehicles, etc. What National Highways have done to help deliver these targets, we've set up our own action plans, because the key thing is really to drive ownership and cross-directorate working to deliver the solutions. The majority of the plans align to the 2030, 40 and 50 targets. Notwithstanding, we have some enabling ones in there, communications, training and skills. We're actually launching our carbon literacy training on Tuesday. One of the challenges we do face as an organisation is how do we get into the hearts and minds of our colleagues to truly embed net zero thinking. One of the focuses for National Highways this year is about PAS 2080 accreditation. So implementing our carbon management system. So how do we drive leadership, governance and target setting? One of the big conversations that's ongoing within National Highways at the moment is actually agreeing the carbon reduction targets for the next road period. There's some potentially significant reductions required from our 2020 baseline, with potentially 50% on our RIS3 projects. What I would like to leave you with, though, is one of the challenges that we're currently looking at, one of the radical proposals that we're thinking of putting forward. So environmental changes caused by carbon impact not only impact the present generation, but also the future generation. So any future road period strategies that we put forward, it's really key that we understand not only the current implications, but potential future ones, to really allow intergenerational decision making. So now that we're thinking about RIS3 and beyond, we're really challenging ourselves to think differently. How can we embed net zero and low carbon thinking? And one of the proposals that we do have is an investment hierarchy being applied to our decision. This really builds upon our net zero plan commitment to use digital technologies to increase capacity of our existing network, minimising new construction. A potential output from this might be that our pipeline includes fewer larger schemes, but many more renewals, digital roads, enabling schemes, but also funding maintenance of the existing asset, managing demand. How can we increase capacity without construction or with minimal construction? This radical way of thinking presents a challenge, given it potentially significantly changes the direction of travel, not only for the organisation, but for the sector. And with that, I'm going to be handing you over to Andrew.
Thanks, Angela. Hi, everyone. My name's Andrew Weaver. I'm Director of Infrastructure at Consultancy. We're specialists in communicating, consulting and engaging people on large-scale, complex infrastructure projects. Our work spans many different sectors, from energy, utilities to transport. And from a roads perspective, we work across a portfolio with national highways and local authorities, the likes of A303 Stonehenge, A66 and Lower Thames Crossing. Through all of these, we know the challenges with communicating complex issues, such as net zero, to the public and stakeholders directly. So a key element of our work is actually understanding people and their attitudes to the projects that we work on. We've been measuring public attitudes to infrastructure for over 5 years to understand kind of key sentiment around our industry. And many of our studies are focused on net zero. The latest piece of research we released in November was net zero attitudes to infrastructure. And this focused on net zero policy and the willingness of people to change habits and activities to support climate change. And it's clear from the research that the public actually do grasp some of the nuances around major infrastructure projects and net zero requirements. And there is a willingness to change day-to-day lives to accommodate a reduction in carbon emissions. Interesting to hear from Tim and Angela, who have both kind of indicated that roads are part of our society as they are at the moment, and the public want to support those things. Some of the key context for this is that 54% of people know what net zero means. 64% were actually aware of government targets. So there is a positive platform to discuss net zero with the public. 50% of the people that we surveyed were actually willing to change the way they travel to benefit net zero. So it puts transport and roads at the top of that potentially supported project list. So there is public ambition to get net zero in transport and roads. But the public also understand that not all projects can or need to be net zero. If an infrastructure project provides vital economic societal benefit, for example, job creation, financial gains for a local economy, but is not net zero, 57% of people said they would still support that project, and only 18% said that they were actively oppose it. So there's support for projects regardless of their net zero position, providing that the benefits are made clear. And I think that's the critical thing. There's a tendency for projects such as roads to kind of shy away from the public debate about the impact on net zero. But interestingly, our research actually showed quite strong support for these types of projects. and also strong support for things like offsetting emissions. I think there's more to be done to explain what offsetting is, why it's acceptable, why it shouldn't be seen as just a failure, and it will actually just be seen as a more positive and practical way of delivering projects in the current environment. So the foundations are there for an honest conversation with the public, but the days of projects being for the days of major projects not being net zero, not having a compelling story of how they are taking responsibility for emissions are over. It is important to explain what net zero means for a project, even if it's bad news, as the public grasps the implications of the projects that have net zero targets. We also need a bit more of a national narrative to explain how some infrastructure projects are inherently not net zero, but are required to support the economy. There is not one rule that should be applied to one project and one rule for another. So for road projects, we need to turn the volume up on how vital they are to the country and to people's daily lives. And we need to properly communicate their implications for net zero while we transition the technology and keep the country and the economy moving. And I think I'm handing over to Gito.
Well, thank you, everybody. I don't know whether it's the best or the worst to come last after three fantastic speakers, but you know, some of the statistics there that Andrew was telling us about were really interesting. Sort of shows the people impact behind a lot of the investments that are being made. As Andy said in his introduction, my name's Gito Davis. I'm head of policy at the AC and the EIC. As a trade association, we're very pleased to be supporting Green Infrastructure Week, and obviously this event today forms an important part of the way that we're supporting this week. We've also got some other events planned tomorrow and Friday, so feel free to visit our website and join some of those. I wanted to use my contribution to highlight the new net zero guide that AC will soon be publishing on the role of roads in the context of net zero, and both Tim and Andy have been supporting us with that piece of work, and I think it's quite a timely opportunity for AC to be contributing to this debate. As Andy said at the top of this seminar, the national effort to make the UK economy fully net zero by 2050 affects every single sector and every business, and has a huge implication for the built environment. And we've already published some net zero guides for SMEs, but as we outlined in those, all built environment projects, large or small, advisory, new build or refurbishment, will and are starting to take account of net zero. In terms of the guide that we'll be publishing, it's certainly going to be aimed at consultancies, of course, working in the road sector to navigate this topic. I think the important part for us was to make sure that it set out the scale and the nature of the challenge, the current and the future policy drivers, and importantly, explain in pretty plain English some of the practical implications for consultancies. This is quite a complex issue to discuss at the time. Now, just in terms of some of the areas that I want to preview, perhaps don't want to give too much away so that you actually look forward to seeing the guide when it's published. But I think the main parts I wanted to cover was possibly the scale and the pace. So understanding the net zero challenge and some of the sort of net zero transport systems that form part of that. And then just some of the sort of policy drivers. So in particular, some of the divergence in policy that's happening across the UK, whether you're sort of working in England, Scotland, or Wales these days, navigating a very complex policy environment. And I want to start on that final point first, because the shift to net zero is being driven by policy development. In 2021, DfT published its transport decarbonisation plan. We've had National Highways' net zero highways plan, as we've heard, including how it intends to bring down the emissions from design and construction of England's strategic roads network. And devolved governments in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland exercise significant powers over their transport systems. And I think it's becoming increasingly clear that different parts of the UK are having different approaches and priorities for decarbonising highways. And, you know, as a result, they're often moving at different speeds. But even in England, you know, it's worth remembering that the Strategic Roads Network only accounts for a very small proportion of the roads in use. The vast majority of streets and roads that shape our towns and cities are managed and mainstreamed by local authorities. And so, you know, they have often declared climate emergencies themselves and have got their own decarbonisation ambitions. I think just towards the end of last year, we had sort of the more regional transport decarbonisation plans by Transport for the North, for example. So a key part of the guide is trying to explain that consultancies will need to be agile, as they already are, and adaptable to deal with this complexity and to try and support AEC members navigating. We've included some of the key targets and policies being pursued in the devolved nations. Tim's mentioned the 5 principles. Unsurprisingly, ARUP's 5 principles are included in our member guide, as are Ramble's approach to road schemes. So 2 very practical examples in our guide of how consultancies are going about dealing with this issue. Just to touch very quickly then on the scale and pace and sort of understanding the net zero challenge. The contribution of roads to achieving a net zero economy has several dimensions, all of which I think demand rapid change. And if we look at sort of net zero transport systems as a very sort of quick example, you know, everybody will know Climate Change Committee, government's official advisor on achieving net zero. It's published a series of carbon budgets, and the current budget, so the 6th one now, of course, sets out a pathway for decarbonising UK surface transport by 2050, and that demands a nearly 50% reduction in emissions by 2050 if we're just to stay on course. And I'm sure it'll come up during the discussion and possibly some of the questions. But if we look at zero emission vehicles, for example, you know, both for personal travel and for the distribution of goods, they've got a very large role to play in delivering this pathway. But as we say in the guide, you know, zero emission vehicles, they're not the whole picture by any means, and the CCC is clear that the transition to zero emission must be accompanied by sort of a hugely significant reduction in the demand for travel in some of the other pathways. So just in conclusion, so that we can open up to a discussion, I think what I'd say is that the consultancy sector has a huge opportunity and actually a responsibility to support the public and private asset owners to ensure the UK's roads and streets make their contribution to the net zero transition. AEC members can contribute in many ways, you know, including transport strategy, transport planning, project appraisal, engineering design, placemaking, adapting existing highways to support zero emission vehicles, and active travel as well, so improving walking and cycling facilities. Put simply, I don't think any other sector has the mix of engineering, strategic thinking, project delivery and advisory skill that AEC members and EIC members in their own right as well can bring to the transition to net zero highways. And I hope when the guide is published that it will be a starting point for more member organisations to embrace this opportunity. So thank you all again for joining the seminar. Thanks to our speakers. Really looking forward to the next 20 minutes of discussion.
Right, many thanks to all the panelists there for their contributions. Some great thoughts there. We're now going to start the Q&A session on this webinar. And a reminder, if you want to ask any questions, do so via the chat box. I see we have one already, and it's quite an I'll read it out. It says the net zero policy endorsed on behalf of taxpayers by governments is now a gargantuan investment opportunity, with major investment funds eyeing the profit opportunities. To what extent have any of the panelists considered how a trace gas CO2 can be an existential threat to humanity. At present, atmospheric CO2 levels are the lowest in the last 100,000 years and are just above the planet life sustainability level. I'm not sure I have the scientific background or knowledge to answer that. Is there anybody who'd like to comment on that particular one?
I'll come as the first stab, and I don't quite get the question because I think it's going against established science. I was born in 1965 when the level of CO2 in the atmosphere was 320. This year, this May, we're going through 421, 422. It's the highest level for at least 5 million years. Again, as a geotechnical engineer, I go back into geology. So sorry, there is a fact that actually as CO2 levels rise, plants grow better. So one of the small silver linings of CO2 levels rising is that we actually can get slightly better plant growth. But I don't think I agree with the questioner. This is an existential threat. Greenhouse gas problem is a real one. It's established. I think it's beyond a matter of opinion. It's now firmly in the matter of actually established science. And if we don't get it sorted, we have major problems coming for our children, our grandchildren. I mean, it is that soon. It's actually, we're bequeathing a world which is actually getting steadily worse. The IPCC report of 2 weeks ago, Secretary General of the UN today said we need to do something. And to some extent, we've all speaking about 2030, 2040, 2050. Secretary General of the UN said this morning we need to do something more quickly. The IPCC report says we actually need to do things in the next 1 or 2 years. I've worked on Crossrail as an example since 1992. It will open this year in 2022, 30 years later. We have less than 28 years to go before 2050. We need more mega projects to actually change what we're doing. This isn't an investment opportunity just to let rich people get quick. This is an investment opportunity to allow us to change our planet so that we don't leave a nasty crust full of really, really bad effects for our grandchildren and our children. So I may have misunderstood the question, but the fact it says the lowest for is factually wrong. I've looked at the evidence going back to actually 30, 40, 50 million years ago, and it's at least 5 million years ago before we actually hit levels of CO2 of 421, 422 parts per million in the atmosphere. It is a trace gas, but it is a greenhouse gas. Methane is also going the wrong way. Methane's up around 1,800 parts per million and going about 10 parts per million per year as well. And people quite often forget about methane as part of the CO2e bundle. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that or disagree, but like I say, I fairly fundamentally disagree with how I think the question is phrased.
Okay, thanks, Tim. That's a very full answer there. We have another one here. Can you elaborate on how the ACE net zero objectives align with PAS 2080 for carbon management in infrastructure? Gitto, is that something you can come in on?
Yeah, happy to. I spotted that question as soon as it came in. I'm very pleased Tim took the first question, that's for sure. Yeah, look, in the guide we make reference to PAS 2080 quite a few times actually. You know, it's already widely used by businesses across the sector. So you know, it's being used to create systems and to manage and measure the carbon associated with the design and the construction of infrastructure. I really like the PAS diagram being grounded in that simple decision hierarchy. And obviously, when we came to design work, that you know had to be in there. We've made very clear that PAS 2080 is a good tool for members to be using. We've got a big list of tools that in the guide that consultancy should be referring to, and PAS is in there. And you know, and I already know when it comes to sort of tackling whole life carbon, you know, many consultancies when looking to tackle carbon reduction, they utilise the principles of PAS 2080, so that's short-term reductions in construction carbon. You know, it could lead to significant increase in carbon and other pollutants generated over a lifetime of operations and maintenance. So that's where sustainability needs to form a central tenet of project-wide discussions. So, you know, for example, reducing resiliency walls by sort of steeping the slope of the road, which I was told about by Ramble. You know, that's in the guide, and sort of that PAS 2080 principle forms an important part of the guide. So yeah, certainly it's in there. We're sort of highlighting the importance of using that as a good tool.
Yeah, you raise a good point there, Gita, about whole life. I think there's more work to be done on. There's rightly a great focus on reducing carbon at construction. But as we know, the greatest carbon is generated for its in-service life. So for me, we shouldn't be afraid of what we might term investing in carbon if we can get the whole life carbon benefits. It's how we tell that story. And perhaps one question here for Andrew, and it sort of leads to that, how we tell the story. What interventions can we implement to help shift behaviours to encourage demand reduction, but also not impact the image of roads being perceived as the problem?
Absolutely, and I think it's a really good question, because I think roads are seen as part of the net zero problem, but they also need to be seen as the net zero solution, because they are such a big player, both in our economy and the way that we get around this country. So there is a perception problem. We do need to change that national discussion around roads being the problem. The reality is that it's about how we kind of balance that positive benefits that they bring, and then how we have that open and honest conversation with the public about what net zero actually means when it comes to roads. And in terms of those kind of interventions, actually what our studies have shown is that people want to make the changes to their lives. 50% of people were willing to change the way in which they travel if it was going to have a benefit on climate change. And I think that's quite compelling. You know, 50% of people will go out there and actively find a different way to get from A to B in order to support climate change. I think that's really, really positive. We also tested, as part of our research, French government policy, which is they were trying to ban internal flights within France. And 80% of people that we studied in the UK actually came out in support of reducing the number of internal flights within the UK, so that people were therefore had an alternative option of going to trains, or potentially even using vehicles, but you know, likes of buses, coaches, other types of transport to get from A to B. And I think the reality is that we're almost pushing on an open door there. We as practitioners, we as, you know, the government potentially, and other organisations just need to put in place what those alternatives are, make them attractive, and I think then the public will actually take that up and start to run with it, and we'll see some behaviour change happening. So it's a little bit of a nudge that I think everybody can give in the direction and direction of travel, and the change will happen.
Thank you, Andrew. A specific question here for Angela. It says, do National Highways intend to embed the deliverables from PAS 2080 process into the PCF matrix deliverables? I feel this must be done to accelerate and align.
Yeah, absolutely. I will answer that one. I just want to add a little bit to what Andrew just said there. It's definitely about changing the narrative. The new comm strategy from DFT, Roads for Good, I really think that will help strengthen the narrative around the perception that roads are bad. They are an intrinsic part of our future. And also that there's a lot to do around modal shift. National Highways are launching a coach passenger improvement plan, because at the moment there's still some potential negative connotations about other modes of transport. So I think the more we can do to improve people's experiences, that will definitely help with that modal shift that we do require. With regards to this specific question, you are absolutely right. Who sent that? Gary. We are in the process of looking at our PCF stage and how we do embed it. We're hoping to have something in draft within the organisation, I think within the next month. Steve's going to be going to the next RIP conference, and I believe he's going to be, well, we're hoping to have it done in time to very much have the draft there for everyone to see and share, but it's very much our intentions.
Thank you, Angela. I have a more general one here. It says, can the panelists suggest any simplified action plan any city can take to set their net zero targets or roadmaps? Any takers on that, Tim?
I think there's a really interesting piece about boundaries, and most city boundaries don't tie up with most infrastructure boundaries, so therefore it's actually quite tricky. But that's the wrong answer. I think when we come to roads explicitly, there's an awful lot that cities can do to try and make things better. And actually, we see a lot of those things happening at the moment. The critical thing is actually how we allocate road space. Cars are the least efficient way of transporting human beings around a city. We need some cars to actually do so, especially people who are disabled and other things like that. But we need to make sure that we actually have ways of encouraging public transport, walking, cycling. And again, this comes back down to roads. And that's why I quite like the change of the word roads from highways to roads, because roads are for people. Roads are ways of getting around. During lockdown, near where I am in central London and close to ARUP's office, there was a 2 car parking spaces got taken out of commission, and 3 cafes put in 18 tables into the 2 car parking spaces. And in the middle of London, I think there's no real reason for most people to actually want to drive in, and especially no reason to dump a lump of metal for several hours a day to actually cause sort of problems for other people. And then once the actual pandemic started to ease, I almost wept when I saw that the local council had actually reinstated the car parking spaces and taken away the 18 cafe tables outside. It was just the start of last summer, and it was an act of wanton vandalism. So I think a critical thing actually in terms of cities is actually about the reallocation of, in terms of the context of what we're talking about today, is the reallocation of space. It's about having sensible public transport alternatives. In most cities, they will be buses again. They will use roads. But actually, I think some of the issues with LTNs, and some LTNs are really good, some are actually pretty ill thought out. I'm in favor of really good LTNs. I'm against LTNs that just actually dump more traffic onto roads that interrupt bus routes and make sure buses get delayed. We need to make sure that we actually allow people to travel, give people lots of travel options. I think the day of the personal car in cities must be coming to an end. But the critical thing is you have to actually come up with a much more compelling vision of cities. It's not the fact that actually low carbon is hair shirt and we're going to beat people up and make them actually not enjoy their way of living, take away their freedoms. I think it's actually about giving people a better, healthier way of doing things. We have a problem with the actual future of shopping. Shops are beginning to fail. Large parts of high streets are emptying. And if we actually enable people to walk, cycle, use public transport, then that brings people back into public spaces and back into actually using shops, using cafes, communities come together again. People actually start to interact together. Hopefully they get less depressed, they get less obese. So I think it's a very virtuous circle that we should be selling as part of actually what we do in cities. Paris is doing some of it, London's actually doing some of it, some of the UK cities are doing it, but we need actually to do it as per the IPCC report. We need to move all these things together far more rapidly, like within months, not within years or within decades, to actually reshape our cities and actually make them much more livable places to live in again. So again, just to rant about American cities, they were very livable a century ago, then the car came in and ruined them. If you look at Detroit in 1920, it had trams, it was a really nice urban city, but then got absolutely trashed by the motor car. So I'm not anti-car, but I'm anti-cities being ruined, and I want cities to become livable again.
Thank you, Tim. Fantastic answer to that one. Here's an interesting one. It said to us all, would you identify at the central government level any conflicting messages, priorities in relation to road-based net zero reduction? Andrew, is that one that you can sort of comment on? Are you coming across that?
Yeah, I think the government's in a difficult position because it comes down to kind of who pays for net zero in the end of the day. And there's got to be a combination of kind of private and public money put forward to deliver this, and they're going to set certain policies. Are they conflicting road-based? I'll probably hand over to Angela for whether they conflict on that level. But for me, because there's a lack of consensus about who pays for it, I think there's some confusion from a public messaging perspective of who is ultimately responsible for it. And there was a mention earlier on about like in private industry getting involved and then taking profits out of it. But if you're making net zero a business that is ultimately going to benefit the country, that's where's the harm? Where do you go with that? So yeah, there are some difficult messages they've got. They probably have got some conflicting at the moment, but let's be honest, everything is moving at pace in order to deliver it. So they are at the moment, I think they're fairly consistent in that. Angela, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
I think just from a national highways viewpoint, there is some potential confusion with regards to the net zero plans and the challenges that we face. The key thing that we need from central government is the support of the direction of travel that we're going. For example, National Highways have a number of projects currently sat with the Secretary of State going through judicial reviews. So it's really important for us that there's a consistent message from the government, but they're also supporting projects that are required as part of larger economic benefits, as long as the whole package has been looked at. So I think the government has some challenges. It's a very complex issue for them, notwithstanding. I think there will be further communication and hopefully clarity coming from them shortly.
Gito, would you like to come in on this one as well?
Yeah, I just I think a broader point, not just on sort of the net zero question in terms of roads, and maybe sort of Andrew we'll see this in some of the work he does, is that we can't sort of overstretch the public's sort of support for this, so we can't sort of take that for granted. And I think when you consider just on a human level, all of us outside of work, we're seeing sort of cost of living increase, and you have that dangerous narrative around sort of the shift to net zero, sort of causing rising costs. We need to almost combat that narrative. If anything, it increases the need to transition quicker. And we've seen that around the discussion on the energy security strategy. So I think just a broader point when it comes to not necessarily government, not answering the question specifically, but just the importance of the narrative and keeping the public on board with the need to transition and not sort of shy away from some of that at the moment.
Okay, we're rapidly running out of time, but there's a final point here by Shalini Kumar, and says, I think there needs to be more communication, training and raising awareness. I think delivering net zero, nature recovery solutions and blue-green infrastructure should be seen as business as usual. A question to us all, what is everyone doing to magnify this message, as there is very little governance for blue-green infrastructure and, in my opinion, impacting a shift. I'm going to just ask you for a couple of words from each of you, if we can go around. Tim, do you want to start?
I kind of totally agree with the question. We need to actually do an awful lot more to increase biodiversity, but blue-green infrastructure isn't enough. I mean, as I said before, we've got SDG 13, 14 and 15 we need to fix, which is actually carbon and life on land, life in water. But actually, fundamentally, A14 is about 1 million tons of carbon. If you actually planted trees to sequestrate that, it'd be 30 kilometers by 30 kilometers square, about the size of London. So it's part of the solution. It's a really important part of the solution, but it's not the only part. But I totally agree with the push.
Angela?
I agree with what Tim said there. I think it's more about looking at the holistic picture of what is the best solution for all, and that might be different in different projects or areas. With regards to the key thing about communication and training and awareness, fundamentally agree. When you even look within National Highways or wider organisation, if you ask people for, what is net zero or what is carbon neutral, you quite often will still get, 5, 6, 7 different responses. So I think we all have a responsibility to help that communication drive and that increase of skills and awareness. And it starts with the carbon literacy training, but it very much is going to be an ongoing journey throughout the next, 6, 12 months to the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Andrew, have you got a comment?
I mean, I'm going to support what everybody said. I mean, yes, there needs to be more communication and training, and absolutely, it's about that national narrative and understanding of what is actually quite a complex subject. And that's all about plain English. So that's all about communicating to the right audience at the right time and at their level. And I think that's key all the way from schools, all the way up to kind of industry and beyond. So yeah, it's a big push, and we will all get better educated over the next few years by requirement, but I think we can all support it, particularly as an industry. Okay.
Right, I think we're just about out of time, and I suspect we've all got our 1 o'clock meetings all to go to. So many thanks for those of you you've attended today. We hope you found this interesting and very helpful. Many thanks to our speakers, Tim, Angela, Andrew and Gitto. Our thanks also to Green Infrastructure Week. We have a keynote session on offshore wind on Friday morning, and there are a range of other free to attend events taking place this week. Please check out the Green Infrastructure Week website. Just a reminder that we have recorded this webinar, and we'll send you a link so that you can refer back to it or forward to your colleagues. So see you next time. Thank you very much.